right? So let's practice the math concept for percentage rent. And then the other way that commercial tenants pay rent is oftentimes based on square footage. So a question could ask us a percentage lease question or rent calculated based on square footage. I'm going to stop sharing here and go into the whiteboard, and let's look at a sample problem like this. So first, you have the percentage lease problem. And that math concept is on page 334 of your book. All right, so you can go ahead and follow along with me looking at the illustration on page 334 first. It says percentage leases call for a minimum monthly rent payment plus a payment of percentage of the tenant's gross sales income exceeding a stated annual amount. For example, so here's our question, our problem, right? A lease might require a minimum rent of $1,300 a month plus 5% of the business sales exceeding $160,000, which is the break point. So on annual sales volume of $250,000, the annual rent is calculated as follows. So first we figure out what the base rent is. In the question, the problem said the base rent was $1,300 a month. We multiply that by 12, and we figure out the annual base rent is $15,600. We know that the tenant only pays percentage rent if they've made $160,000 in sales that year, gross sales. So we find out that they actually made $250,000 in gross sales. So we subtract the 160 from the 250, and that's $90,000 that they're going to have to pay percentage rent on. So 90,000 times 5%, which was the agreed upon percentage rent, is 4,500. So if we add their base annual rent of 15,600 together with their percentage rent of 4,500, we get a total annual rent of $20,100. All right, so that is the sample question that's in your math concept. And again, I would encourage you to make a math note card for that. That'll help you remember that math concept of calculating percentage rent. Okay, I'm looking for a different book here. Okay, and now I want to go over another variation of a question on percentage rent that appears on page 342. So this is a question at the end of the chapter, and it's question number 13. So hopefully you've done these problems at the end of chapter 17 and checked your answers in the answer key. But if not, let's take a look at this question together and see how we would calculate this problem. Okay, so this is a percentage lease question. In this question, it says a commercial lease calls for a minimum rent of $1,200 per month plus 4% of the annual gross business exceeding $150,000. If the total rent paid at the end of 1 year was $19,200, how much business did the tenant do during the year? So this is kind of a switch to that formula that we just looked at on page 334, right? So that formula had us calculate the percentage rent and add it back into the base rent. Here they're wanting to know, well, how much business did the tenant do if they paid this much rent, right? So we kind of have to work a little bit backwards in this one. The first thing I would want to do is know how much of that rent that the tenant paid, in other words, they paid $19,200, how much of that rent was actual base rent, okay? So I know they paid $1,200 a month. If I take $1,200 a month times 12,